The heat was a physical presence, a humid fist squeezing the air out of the suburban valley. Alex stood motionless at the kitchen island, clutching a mug of lukewarm coffee, watching the slow, grinding sunrise paint the terracotta tiles of the patio. But the beautiful morning light only illuminated the source of his chronic, grinding rage. There she was, Carol. She insisted everyone call her by the name printed on her vintage Chanel sunglasses, Karen, a label she wore with aggressive pride. She was floating on Alex's inflatable swan, her head tipped back, a faint, contented hum escaping her throat, a sound that grated on Alex's nerves like fingernails on ceramic. "Good morning, Carol," Alex said, his voice dangerously even as he stepped out onto the patio. Karen, didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her shades, a tiny smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, Alex, goodness, you startled me. This water is absolutely divine today, darling. You really must tell your pool guy how much I appreciate his work." "He's my pool guy, Carol, and this is my pool. And this is the 5th morning this week you've decided to treat my private property like a public water park." She finally sat up, the swan rocking gently. The movement sent lazy ripples across the surface. She was wearing a new suit, expensive, tasteless, and designed purely for maximum visibility. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm just cooling off. Besides, this development is technically a shared community space, you know. Article 4, subsection B, common easement rights." Alex felt the familiar hot pressure building behind his eyes. He had consulted Article 4, subsection B. It referred to the shared sidewalk between their properties, not his deeded, fenced, and privately maintained swimming pool. Carol knew it. He knew it. And the sheer audacity of the lie was what always pushed him over the edge. "You climbed a 6-foot privacy fence to get here, Carol. You are trespassing. I have photos. I have video. I have filed a police report." She laughed, a short, sharp, dry sound that carried zero actual humor. "The police? Over a little refreshing dip? Good luck, Alex. They told me this was a civil matter, property line disputes, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, you need to relax. We're neighbors. Isn't sharing what being in a community is all about?" She slid off the swan and waded towards the shallow end, her movements slow and deliberate, designed to mock his impotence. She grabbed a towel, one of his towels, Egyptian cotton, navy blue, from the chair. "By the way," she called over her shoulder as she strolled towards the gap in the fence she always pried open, "you're running a little low on the cucumber mint-infused water in your dispenser." I helped myself to the last of it. "Toodaloo!" Alex stood in the unforgiving morning sun, watching his beautiful life, his sanity, drain away with the droplets of water she left on his deck. His hands were shaking. He felt like a caged animal. Every legal and rational avenue had failed. Warnings were ignored. Fences were breached. Police shrugged. He was trapped in a cold war with a woman who operated with the moral compass of a shark. He knew with a sudden, chilling clarity that the next step had to be something entirely irrational. Something that wasn't illegal, but was personally, profoundly disgusting to Carol. That afternoon, Alex drove to 3 different discount warehouse stores, avoiding his usual supermarket. He filled his shopping cart with industrial-sized plastic jugs of the cheapest, stickiest, darkest, heavily processed honey he could find. He added 6 bags of raw sugar and a sack of rock salt, just for good measure. The plan was crude, desperate, and probably insane. He wouldn't poison the water. That was illegal, and he wasn't a criminal. He wouldn't dye it a terrible color. She might like it. He wouldn't drain it. Too expensive to refill. No. He would make it subtly, personally, unappealing. He would make the water wrong. His reasoning was simple. Carol prided herself on her image, her perfect tan, and her high-end lifestyle. She would not tolerate walking around smelling faintly of cheap corn syrup or feeling perpetually sticky. A little dilution wouldn't make the water look different, but it would ruin the feel of it. It would attract something unpleasant, dirt, bacteria, maybe just judgmental stares. He sat on his deck in the fading light, reading the ingredients label of one of the honey jugs. Glucose, high fructose corn syrup, natural flavor, Color additives. Perfect. A chemical cocktail guaranteed to offend Carol's delicate sensibilities. The sun finally set, and a quiet, oppressive darkness settled over the neighborhood. Alex waited another hour, listening to the crickets and the distant traffic, the only sounds accompanying his descent into low-grade chemical warfare. He got to work. He wheeled the heavy jugs and bags out onto the deck. The pool filter system, a complicated beast he barely understood, was his target. He found the skimmer basket, the entry point. His hands shook, but this time not from rage, from a grim determination. This was his last stand. He started with the salt, pouring handfuls into the skimmer. Then came the sugar, dissolving quickly into the intake current, adding a subtle sweetness to the water that was usually crisp and clean. Finally, the honey. It wasn't viscous in the Arizona evening, but thick and heavy. He cut the tops off the jugs and tipped them over the edge, directing the golden, syrupy stream into the skimmer. The sheer volume was shocking. It smelled overpoweringly sweet, a cloying, heavy scent that quickly saturated the air around the pool. The pump whirred, greedily sucking the deterrent into the circulation system. It took 40 minutes. By the time he was done, the entire patio area was sticky. Alex felt sick, physically and morally. He had just ruined a $50,000 investment over a petty feud. But a small, triumphant voice in his head whispered, "She won't swim in that." She won't. He scrubbed his hands raw, hauled the empty containers into his garage, and went to bed, utterly exhausted. He set his alarm for 6 a.m., eager to witness the clean, decisive victory. Alex awoke before his alarm, adrenaline already coursing through his veins. He didn't need coffee. He didn't need light. He needed to see Carol recoil in disgust. He pulled on a pair of shorts and crept onto the patio, moving slowly, cautiously, like a sniper approaching his target. The sun had just crested the neighbor's roof, bathing the pool in a dazzling, cruel light. Alex stopped dead on the pool deck. His breath hitched in his throat. The pool was still. The water looked deceptively clear, perhaps slightly milky, but still blue. The inflatable swan floated serenely. Carol was nowhere to be seen. Yes! He had won! The deterrence had worked without a confrontation. Alex let out a slow, shaky breath. He turned to go back inside, savoring the victory when he heard it. It wasn't Carol's annoying hum. It was a sound that grew from a soft, consistent purr to a loud, frantic drone. It was the sound of thousands of tiny, vibrating wings. He turned back to the pool, his triumph dissolving into a cold, sickening horror. The air above the water was no longer empty. It was thick with movement. Hundreds, no thousands, of insects were circling the pool, drawn by the overwhelming concentrated scent of sugar and honey that was now being pumped through the chlorinated water. They were everywhere. Bees, fat and slow, gorging themselves on the water droplets. Wasps, lean and aggressive, dive-bombing the surface. Hornets, larger and darker, patrolling the perimeter. They weren't just drinking. They were drowning. The surface of the pool was dotted with the sinking bodies of the insects, creating a swirling, organic, amber-colored scum along the edges. A few larger, particularly ambitious honeybees had managed to latch on to the inflatable swan, crawling over its plastic back, sampling the honey-infused residue. The entire pool deck, the pristine white concrete, was now buzzing, crawling, and shimmering with an angry, confused, and highly territorial swarm. The fence that kept Carol out also trapped the nightmare in. "Oh, God," Alex whispered, backing away, the smell of sweet, hot honey suddenly making him nauseous. This wasn't a deterrent. This was an invitation. This was an ecological disaster. He didn't just ruin his pool. He had created an enormous, weaponized, sugary death trap. Just then, the gate to the driveway slammed open. "Alex, you absolute idiot!" Carol's voice, harsh and indignant, sliced through the morning air, followed by the clack of her ridiculously expensive mules. "I saw the jugs last night. What did you think you were doing, ruining this water? Oh my gosh!" She skidded to a stop right at the edge of the patio, her eyes widening in genuine, unadulterated terror. She didn't look at Alex. She looked at the buzzing, swirling, living cloud above the water, at the angry yellow jackets landing on the deck only feet from her bare legs. The self-assured entitlement drained from her face, replaced by a raw, primal fear. The water was undrinkable for her, yes, but for them, it was a feast. Alex and Carol stood 6 feet apart, their petty conflict momentarily erased by the sheer scale of the disaster he had unleashed. The buzzing intensified, a terrifying manic sound of hunger and defensive rage. "What did you do?" Carol finally choked out, her voice barely a whisper. No longer the entitled queen, but just a horrified woman. Alex swallowed, his eyes darting between her terrified face and the thousands of venomous guests swirling over the poisoned water. "I tried to keep you out," Alex replied, his voice flat, defeated. "I got a little more than I bargained for. The largest hornet, dark, huge, and seemingly the leader of the hive, flew directly towards Carol's head, mistaking her bright yellow sun hat for a massive sweet flower. Carol screamed, a high, piercing sound, and slapped wildly at Ye. Carol's scream wasn't the sound of an annoyed neighbor. It was the raw, guttural cry of genuine agony and sheer terror. The hornet, momentarily distracted by the thrashing limbs, dipped and circled back towards the sticky, frantic mess of her body on the deck. "Stay still! Don't move!" Alex yelled, his heart slamming against his ribs. His calculated revenge had curdled into involuntary manslaughter. The thousands of buzzing insects registered Carol's sudden movement and scream as a threat, and the buzzing immediately shifted from a hungry purr to an angry, targeted drone. Alex didn't think. He reacted. He grabbed the nearest thing, a flimsy plastic pool skimming net, and swung it wildly, not at the insects, but to create a momentary screen of air around Carol's head. "My ankle! It's broken, Alex, you psycho! Get me out of here!" Carol shrieked, clutching her leg, the pain eclipsing her entitlement for the first time in their war. I know! Alex crouched low, ignoring the wasps that were starting to dive-bomb his exposed neck. The deck was treacherous, slick with spilled corn syrup, making traction almost impossible. He reached for her arm. "We have to crawl." "Keep your face down." The air was alive. A cloud of yellow jackets had formed a dense, vibrating layer just above the pool's surface, guarding their newfound sugar water. The pool, once a symbol of relaxation, was now a moat of sweet, poisonous death. He hauled Carol's limp weight, dragging her backward across the slick concrete, away from the worst of the swarm. Her body scraped across the ground, sending fresh jolts of pain through her leg, but the fear of being stung, or worse, of an allergic reaction, lent her a terrible, primal strength. "The gate! Get to the gate!" she whimpered, tears streaking the high SPF sunscreen on her face. It was only 30 feet, but it felt like a mile. Each drag was heavy, each second measured by the frantic whine of wings. Finally, they reached the French doors leading back into the kitchen. Alex kicked the screen door open and pulled Carol across the threshold, slamming the heavy glass behind them. The immediate silence was deafening, broken only by Carol's ragged, sobbing breaths. The muffled roar of the swarm continued, pressing against the glass. Alex stood hunched over, his chest heaving, adrenaline draining away to be replaced by a terrifying, hollow dread. He looked at Carol, curled in a fetal position on his kitchen tile, clutching a grotesquely angled ankle. "I'm calling 911, Alex muttered, scrambling for his phone. "No! Don't you dare!" Carol gasped, struggling to sit up. "You're calling my lawyer first." "You did this, Alex! This is assault! This is biohazard! My house is right there!" "What if they come over the fence?" "They're coming over the fence because you were in my pool, Carol, and now you have a broken ankle. We need a paramedic and a hazmat team." "Look outside!" Alex glanced at the door. The swarm was consolidating. Hundreds of insects were crawling up the glass, tasting the residue of their rescue. The gate to the driveway was still wide open. He ignored her, punching in the emergency number. He kept his voice steady as he explained the situation. A fall, a broken ankle, and the key detail he tried to downplay. A significant pest problem. The arrival of the first responders was a disaster. The paramedic team, trained for twisted ankles and cardiac events, were wholly unprepared for the sheer volume of aggressive, angry insects. The swarm, galvanized by the noise of the siren, became a unified wall of defense. They couldn't get within 20 feet of the patio without running into a barrage of defensive stingers. Alex and Carol watched through the kitchen window as the paramedics, decked out in their white protective gear, retreated rapidly back to their ambulance. "The situation is untenable." "Sir!" the lead paramedic shouted through a crack in the glass. "We need animal control and possibly a specialized unit to secure the area." "We can't get to her with this kind of activity," Carol let out a hysterical wail. "I'm going to lose my foot." "I'm going to sue you for everything you own, Alex." "You're going to be fine," Alex said, though he was staring at the deck where the hornets were now visibly dragging the body of a drowned bee towards the edge, exhibiting a chilling organization. "Just focus on breathing." A police car pulled up behind the ambulance. Officer Mendoza, a sharp, unsmiling woman Alex recognized from his previous trespassing complaints, stepped out. She took one look at the shimmering air over the pool and immediately put her hand on her radio. "We have an active, aggressive swarm of Hymenoptera species, requesting immediate contact with the city's entomology unit and a structural assessment of the chemical contamination," Mendoza stated flatly into her mic. She looked through the window at Alex. "Mr. Thorne, I need you to explain exactly what chemical you introduced into this body of water." Alex's stomach plummeted. This wasn't a civil spat anymore. This was a criminal investigation. He took a deep breath. "It was honey, officer, and sugar, a large quantity. I was trying to make the water sticky and unattractive to the trespasser." He gestured weakly at Carol, who glared back with the fury of 1,000 broken bones. Mendoza's expression didn't change. She just nodded slowly. "So you knowingly created a feeding attractant for aggressive wildlife on your property, leading to the injury of a neighbor who was, regardless of your personal dispute, fleeing from the threat you created. I didn't intend to create a swarm. I intended to create slightly sticky water." Alex protested, desperation creeping into his voice. "Intention doesn't change consequence, Mr. Thorne." An hour later, Dr. Lena Hansen, a state entomologist, arrived, clad in full protective netting. She was a small, intense woman with a severe ponytail and a notepad she clutched like a weapon. She ventured onto the deck while Alex, Carol, the police, and the paramedics watched from the relative safety of the kitchen. Dr. Hansen spent 20 harrowing minutes documenting the scene. She took samples of the water with a long, retractable pole. She photographed the amber sludge. She took several close-up shots of the insects, the honeybees, the yellow jackets, and the large, menacing black hornets. When she finally retreated, pulling off her net, her face was pale and serious. The bees are primarily standard European honeybees, but the sheer density of yellow jackets and what appears to be a nesting colony of Vespa orientalis, Asian hornets, though thankfully a smaller specimen, is highly concerning, she announced. Addressing Officer Mendoza, "The core problem is the sugar concentration. It's extreme. This isn't just a watering hole. It's a massive overflowing syrup bucket. The chlorine has mixed with the high-fructose corn syrup and heat to create a kind of highly desirable, slightly fermented tonic. They're addicted, officer. And they are nesting now. This is their territory," she turned to Alex. "Mr. Thorne, you didn't just attract them. You essentially created a territorial, high-value resource during a severe drought. The entire local hive population is mobilized here. Attempting to drain the pool will only scatter the insects, making them aggressive and driving them into the surrounding homes. This property is now a containment zone." Officer Mendoza looked at Alex. "Dr. Hansen estimates the cleanup and remediation, including professional hive removal and pool decontamination, will be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Not to mention the environmental fine for introducing unauthorized chemicals and killing protected insects." "Protected insects?" Alex whispered, his blood running cold. "The yellow jackets, no. The honeybees, yes. This pool is now a mass casualty site for pollinators. Mr. Thorne, that's a major violation." Suddenly, Carol's attorney, a sharp, immaculate man named Mr. Denton, burst through the front door, having bypassed the back patio entirely. He took in the scene, the injured client, the police, the entomologist, the humming threat outside, and his face twisted into a triumphant sneer. He immediately served Alex a thick packet of papers. This is an emergency temporary restraining order, Mr. Thorne, Denton stated, his voice ringing with authority. Effective immediately. You are forbidden from coming within 50 feet of Miss Sterling while she is on her property or yours, and you are ordered to vacate your residence within 2 hours, pending a full cleanup and a court hearing for personal injury and criminal vandalism. Alex stared at the order, then at his pool, then at Carol, who was now being carefully secured onto a stretcher by the returning paramedics. She locked eyes with him and the fear was gone. Her entitled smirk was back, darker and more venomous than ever. "See you in court, Alex," Carol whispered, a note of cruel justice in her voice. Alex was being evicted from his own house, his petty revenge resulting not in victory, but in a fractured ankle, a potential felony, and a takeover by thousands of angry, protected bees. He didn't even have a bag packed. He walked to the window and saw the largest hornet land on the inflatable Swan, claiming the plastic bird as its throne. The 2-hour deadline was a brutal physical pressure. Alex moved through his own home, a beautiful, custom-built cage with the frantic, disconnected efficiency of a burglar. Officer Mendoza stood watch near the front door, impassive and professional, ensuring compliance. The back of the house remained sealed, the glass doors now a terrifying panorama of a biological barricade. He could only take what he could carry: financial documents, his laptop, and 2 changes of clothes. Everything else, furniture, art, memories, was now collateral, locked down behind a barrier of protective, highly aggressive insects. As he hauled his single suitcase past Mendoza, he saw a gaggle of neighbors standing across the street, their faces a mix of morbid curiosity and judgmental satisfaction. Alex Thorne, the successful man with the perfect house, was now the neighborhood pariah, driven out by a combination of high-fructose corn syrup and angry Asian hornets. "We'll seal the back patio with netting once you're gone." "Mr. Thorne," Mendoza informed him, "the entomology unit is installing remote sensors to monitor the chemical breakdown and the insect behavior. Do not attempt to breach the perimeter." "Where am I supposed to go?" Alex asked, the question ringing hollow. "That is a civil matter. Your attorney will advise you." "My attorney." Alex drove until the clean, sterile suburbs gave way to the neon-streaked anonymity of highway motels. He checked into the cheapest, darkest room he could find, the air conditioning rattling a frantic counterpoint to the buzzing still echoing in his mind. For the next 4 hours, he made calls. Every conversation was a variation on a theme: confusion, disbelief, and flat-out refusal. "Let me be clear. Mr. Thorne," said the fifth lawyer, a high-priced litigator named Stern, over a crackling phone line. "You admit to willfully polluting your own property, resulting in the formation of a fermented sugar tonic that attracted an endangered species swarm and injured a trespasser, who is now claiming the injury occurred while she was attempting to flee the resultant danger. It's a liability, Ouroboros. I can't touch it. But the trespassing! The police reports! She was breaking the law first," Alex pleaded, pacing the cramped motel room. "Irrelevant. Her broken ankle occurred on your property due to a hazard you created. Intent to deter is not a defense against negligence. And the environmental charges? Those honeybees are worth more to the state than your entire HOA. Call a public defender for the vandalism charge and call your insurance company. You're going to need a good umbrella policy." Alex hung up, his hands shaking. He wasn't just broke. He was toxic. His assets were inaccessible, his home was a biohazard, and his name was about to become the punchline of a regional news cycle. He needed leverage. He needed proof that Carol's actions were just as malicious, just as calculated, as his own, that she had provoked this war and was now exploiting the carnage. That evening, a local news helicopter hovered over Alex's house, turning his perfect pool into a spotlighted spectacle. Alex watched the live stream on his laptop, nestled in his grim motel room. The reporter was describing the scene with breathless, over-the-top drama. The unprecedented sticky water swarm, a terrifying, organized response to what authorities are calling a rogue chemical pollutant. Experts note the insects are exhibiting highly unusual coordinated behavior, unlike anything seen in residential zones. The live camera feed showed the pool. The surface was now noticeably darker, almost amber brown. The inflatable swan, the symbol of Carol's trespass, was completely coated in a layer of insects, motionless but vibrating. Then the camera zoomed in on the pool deck. Right near the sealed French doors, Alex saw it immediately, and a chill that had nothing to do with the rattling air conditioner ran down his spine. The Asian hornets, the largest, darkest, most aggressive insects Dr. Hansen had identified, were working in coordinated teams. They weren't just drinking. They were forming small, pulsating rings around the perimeter of the pool, and they were clearing debris. Using their mandibles, they were lifting the small, dead bee bodies and dropping them precisely into the nearest filter drain. The insects were cleaning the water. They were actively managing their resource. The news anchor's voice cut through the background music. And in a bizarre development, Ms. Carol Sterling, the injured neighbor, has filed a petition not just for damages, but for temporary property guardianship, citing the environmental hazard and Mr. Thorne's unstable mental state. Her attorney, Mr. Denton, claims she needs access to mitigate potential long-term property damage from the infestation, given Mr. Thorne's refusal to cooperate. Refusal to cooperate. Alex had been forcibly evicted. A cold, sick certainty settled over him. Carol didn't just want money. She wanted the house. Her temporary guardianship plea was a Trojan horse, a way to gain legal access to his deed, and once the containment was lifted, begin the process of taking control through adverse possession or forced sale due to the massive remediation costs she would incur in his stead. The honey had been his stupid, desperate move. Her response was a brilliant, predatory legal strategy. He stared at the screen, watching the hornets work. They were organized. They had a plan, and they were doing a better job maintaining the pool than he ever did. Suddenly, a new image appeared on the screen, a close-up provided by the remote entomology camera. It was a shot of a yellow jacket landing on a piece of bright white paper Dr. Hansen had left on the edge of the deck. The insect dipped its head, then flew away. Seconds later, another yellow jacket landed, but this one didn't drink. It flew directly toward the seal of the French doors. A new thought hit Alex, so absurd it might be true. He remembered the rock salt he had dumped into the skimmer. Salt, sugar, chlorine, and heat. The toxic brew was fermenting into something volatile, maybe even psychoactive. The hornets weren't just organized. They were exhibiting signs of chemically induced collective intelligence. They were protecting their intoxicating nectar. His war with Carol had been replaced by a war with a chemically engineered, highly organized insect army, commanded by an opportunistic lawyer. He looked at his single suitcase. He couldn't fight this from a motel room. He needed proof of Carol's manipulative trespassing and the true nature of the honey water. He needed to get back into the containment zone, but the police were watching. The neighbors were watching. And the insects? The insects were organized. Alex grabbed his car keys and started the engine. He knew a back way into the development, an old, overgrown access road used by utility trucks. If he couldn't legally enter his home, he would have to become a trespasser himself. He wasn't going to let Carol win by default. He was going to find a way to dismantle the hive and expose her legal counterfeit, even if it meant facing the swarm head-on. The fluorescent glare of the motel bathroom mirror showed a man who looked hollowed out and desperate. Alex Thorne was no longer the successful, measured executive who valued order. He was a fugitive planning a heist. His meager funds had been spent on tools of infiltration, a pair of thick, padded work boots, dark tactical pants, a cheap, full-body painter's suit, and, crucially, a beekeeper's veil purchased from a feed store 50 miles away. He knew the security. It wasn't about alarms. It was about the police presence and the containment netting. Under the cold, sterile light of the three-quarter moon, Alex crept along the overgrown utility easement behind the community. The air here was heavy with the scent of dry weeds and dust, a merciful contrast to the memory of cloying, fermented sweetness. He found the section of the privacy fence he knew was weakest, a forgotten joint near a thick oleander bush, and surveyed the new additions. The police had strung a wide, high-tensile netting over the entire backyard, extending from the house eaves to the perimeter fence. It looked like a massive dark cage. He reached into his kit and pulled out a pair of large, heavy-duty wire cutters. Snip, snip, Snip. The cuts were slow, agonizingly loud in the oppressive silence. He created a small, jagged hole near the base, just large enough to squeeze through. He pulled himself through, landing heavily on the grass on the other side. He was in the containment zone. The feeling was immediate and visceral, a profound, sickening combination of trespassing and violating a shrine. The darkness magnified the subtle sounds of the backyard. The low-grade hum was constant, a pervasive electrical drone that vibrated in his chest. It wasn't the scattered sound of natural insects. It was the organized breathing of a collective. Alex zipped up his suit, securing the veil. He relied on the moon and the faint, blinking red lights of the entomology unit's remote sensors. He had 2 targets: the hard drive containing years of security footage proving Carol's habitual trespassing, and a water sample to prove the liquid was now chemically volatile. Not just simple honey water. His first target was the hard drive, hidden inside a fake rock near the irrigation control box, right next to the pool equipment enclosure. He moved low, keeping to the shadows of the planters. The air was thick with the concentrated saccharin aroma. He noticed the organizational creep immediately. The Asian hornets, massive and dark, were not merely roosting. They were positioned in clusters of 3 on the roof of the pump enclosure, like tiny, silent gargoyles. Along the top railing of the sealed French doors, small, motionless knots of honeybees had formed, acting as sentinel posts. He reached the irrigation box, his heart hammering against the thin fabric of the painter's suit. He felt a deep instinctive revulsion, knowing he was only feet away from the swirling toxicity that had ruined his life. His hand searched, found the fake rock, and grasped the cool metal of the drive. Success. 1 piece of evidence secured. Now, the water sample. This was the dangerous part. He needed to get within inches of the pool's edge, right next to the main chemical intake, the skimmer, where the concentration would be highest. He had brought a long, rigid PVC pipe taped to a small, sterile container. He crept toward the pool's edge. The inflatable swan was a grotesque effigy. It was completely obscured by thousands of insects, a vibrating brown and yellow shroud covering the plastic. He extended the pipe slowly, the small container dipping toward the amber surface. The water was still, too still. The organized insects were barely moving, conserving energy, waiting for the sun to rise and reactivate their feast. The lip of the bottle met the water. He pushed down, feeling the viscous resistance of the liquid. The amber-brown liquid poured into the container, a thick, sickening slosh. Just as the container filled and Alex began the slow, delicate process of retraction, a subtle error occurred. The movement was too sudden, too much of a shockwave through the silent, dense air. A flicker of movement caught his eye. The largest hornet, the one he'd seen on the news sitting atop the skimmer, had shifted. It faced him. It let out a rapid, high-frequency thrum, a sound so fast it was almost subsonic. It was an alarm. The effect was instantaneous and terrifying. The thousands of insects that had been quietly sleeping erupted in a single, unified burst of movement. The air over the pool became a dense, swirling vortex, the hum rising to a screaming roar that enveloped Alex entirely. The hornets on the pump enclosure peeled off, flying with murderous precision directly toward his veiled head. Alex didn't hesitate. He secured the container, tucked it into the pocket of his suit, and bolted. He ran the only direction he could, toward the jagged hole in the perimeter fence. He was fast, but the suit limited his movement. He vaulted the low row of potted plants, his foot catching the rim of a terracotta pot. He fell hard, sprawling across the slick, sticky pool deck, the very same surface that had broken Carol's ankle. The hard drive containing his only tangible proof skittered across the concrete, stopping agonizingly close to the humming, living shroud on the swan. The swarm was on him. Dozens of yellow jackets landed on his back, searching for weak points in the suit. The hornets, smarter, were focused entirely on the fabric of the veil and his exposed boots. He scrambled, ignoring the impacts, prioritizing the evidence. He lunged for the hard drive, snatched it up, and shoved it deep into his pocket. The pain was a sudden, white-hot explosion in his right ankle. A large hornet had found the seam between his boot and the tactical pants. Then another. And a third. It was not the familiar ache of a bee sting. It was an intense, crippling burn. He roared, the sound swallowed by the deafening buzz. Adrenaline surged. He dragged himself the last few feet to the hole he had cut, kicking backward wildly to fend off the organized assault. He pushed his body through the opening, the netting tearing and scratching at the fabric of his suit. He stumbled out into the relative safety of the utility easement, collapsing behind the thick oleander bush. He lay there for a long time, gasping, waiting for the buzzing to recede. The thrumming sound behind the fence slowly decreased, settling back into its low, vigilant hum. The crisis was averted, but the damage was done. Alex finally peeled off the suit. His ankle was already swelling grotesquely, 3 perfect fiery red puncture marks visible on the skin. But it wasn't the pain that stopped him. It was the sudden, bizarre clarity. The sting was causing a strange, vivid euphoria, a rush of focus and manic energy that felt distinctly unnatural. He recognized the feeling. It was sharp, jittery, and intensely demanding, like a massive caffeine overdose mixed with a single-minded determination. The venom must have contained trace amounts of the fermented pool tonic. He had the drive. He had the sample. But as he looked down at his throbbing, poisoned ankle, he realized he had exchanged his freedom for a viral infection. He was now tainted by the same toxic, mind-altering substance that was organizing the very hive he was fighting. Suddenly, a voice cut through the darkness from the front of the house. I heard something. It sounded like the fence. A flashlight beam sliced through the air, sweeping across the driveway. It was Officer Mendoza making her rounds. Alex scrambled, grabbing his discarded suit and the hard drive. He was a trespasser, stung and possibly infected, with a massive liability in his hand. He had to run. The manic clarity granted by the hornet venom, mixed with the pool's volatile tonic, pulsed behind Alex's eyes like a malfunctioning circuit board. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. His mind raced at 10 times the normal speed, processing data, anticipating objections, and editing video footage with a hyper-focus that bordered on the supernatural. His ankle, hot and throbbing, felt distant, a problem for later. The only thing that mattered was the looming 9 a.m. emergency guardianship hearing. He used the darkest hours of the night to find a marginal, independent lab specializing in environmental contaminants. For an extortionate emergency fee, they ran a rapid GCMS analysis on his water sample. The report, delivered digitally at 7 a.m., confirmed his chilling suspicion. The mixture of high-fructose corn syrup, trace salt, and chlorine had undergone a chemical reaction exacerbated by the high summer heat. It hadn't just fermented. It had produced a complex polyol and a highly potent, mildly psychoactive compound that was incredibly addictive to the Hymenoptera species. The entomologist's term, territorial, was an understatement. They weren't just protecting a food source. They were protecting their drug supply. The hard drive, now scrubbed of unnecessary data and focused solely on Carol's 6 most egregious pool breaches, was ready. The footage showed her smugly crossing the property line, deliberately using his private facilities and confirming premeditated malice in her actions, long before his deterrent was even conceived. Alex arrived at the courthouse looking like a man who had gone several rounds with a ghost. He wore the same dark tactical pants and a wrinkled shirt, his face pale, his eyes wide and bloodshot from the venom-fueled clarity. He hobbled but didn't allow himself a cane. Carol Sterling was already there, positioned strategically in a borrowed wheelchair, her bandaged, casted ankle propped dramatically on a cushion. Her lawyer, Mr. Denton, looked every bit the shark in his custom-tailored suit. The hearing commenced, and Denton opened with a devastatingly effective narrative. He painted Carol as a victim of a neighbor-on-neighbor terror campaign, a helpless woman who sought temporary respite from the heat, only to be chemically ambushed by a deranged lunatic who created a bioweapon that subsequently injured her while she was fleeing the hazard. We asked the court to grant immediate temporary guardianship of Mr. Thorne's residence, Denton concluded, his voice resonating with moral outrage. The property is a recognized environmental containment zone, and Mr. Thorne has proven himself mentally unstable and a flight risk, having absconded from the premises and breached the police perimeter last night. Alex rose, fueled by the angry, hyper-focused energy coursing through his veins. He didn't speak the lawyer's language. He spoke in facts. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce two pieces of evidence," Alex stated, his voice raspy but intensely focused. Exhibit A, the forensic chemical analysis of the pool water, which shows it is not honey water, but a volatile, psychoactive liquid that triggered a mass hive migration. He placed the lab report on the clerk's desk. And Exhibit B, security footage proving the alleged victim, Ms. Sterling, was not seeking respite, but was a serial, malicious, and repeated trespasser over a 2-year period, establishing clear provocation. The judge, a seasoned woman who had seen everything from corporate fraud to domestic murder, studied the documents. Denton leaped to object, citing improper evidence gathering and Alex's admitted breach of the perimeter. Objection overruled. "Mr. Denton, the footage speaks to the defendant's motive, and the chemical report speaks to the nature of the hazard. Continue, Mr. Thorne." Alex clicked the remote, and the courtroom monitor sprang to life, displaying Carol's smug, triumphant face climbing his fence month after month. The court fell silent. Carol's pristine facade crumbled, replaced by pure, ugly rage. "He doctored that," Carol shrieked, pushing herself forward in the wheelchair. "He's a liar!" The judge banged her gavel. "Mrs. Sterling, silence." "Mr. Thorne, the video clearly establishes repeated trespass. However, the creation of a chemical attractant still constitutes reckless endangerment, regardless of provocation." Alex pointed to the lab report. "Your Honor, the analysis also confirms trace amounts of this psychoactive compound are present in the venom of the insects. The effect, as I can attest, is intense clarity and mania. The insects are not just guarding the pool. They are chemically driven. They are acting as a collective, highly organized addict protecting its supply. The threat is not contained. The pool has become a super hive." The judge leaned back, considering the twisted complexity of the case, a legal war escalating into a biological one. "The request for permanent guardianship is denied," the judge declared. "However, Mr. Thorne is ordered to remain absent from the property and must submit to a psychiatric evaluation. The massive remediation cost is temporarily divided between both parties, given the established mutual recklessness." Denton immediately began to argue, but the judge raised her hand. "This court will reconvene in 72 hours for a status update on the remediation efforts. I need proof the danger is receding, or I will order a city-funded forced cleanup." Just as the judge finished, the doors to the courtroom burst open, and a disheveled Officer Mendoza rushed in, her face pale with shock. She ignored the protocol, marching straight up to the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize, but there's an emergency. It's the containment zone. The hive. It's migrating," Denton scoffed. "A migrating hive? They just need more sugar." "No, sir. They need water," Mendoza said, her voice trembling. "The pool water reached a critical viscosity threshold just an hour ago, too thick for them to drink easily. The insects, behaving with unnerving collective focus, have abandoned the pool entirely." Alex felt a cold dread settle over his hyper-aware mind. The swarm was smarter than they thought. It had adapted, Mendoza continued, turning to Carol. "The hive has relocated, Ms. Sterling. It is currently swarming your backyard. They are consuming the water from your koi pond, your irrigation system, and they found a primary source, the overflowing sweet condensation from your air conditioning unit, which is now caked with dead bees and hornets. Your home has been designated the new containment zone." Carol's face, which had been set in triumph only minutes before, went slack with horror. Her lawyer looked like he'd been hit by lightning. "This is your fault, Alex," Carol screamed, attempting to launch herself out of the wheelchair. The judge slammed her gavel, but her eyes were fixed on the horrified paralegals who were now whispering and pointing at their phones. "Order! The court is adjourned. Both parties are to report to the site supervisor immediately." Alex watched Carol being wheeled away by her panicked lawyer. The insect's chemically induced collective had passed its final judgment not in the cold calculus of the court, but through the visceral, immediate power of nature. They had simply followed the path of least resistance to a similar, adjacent water source. Alex stumbled out of the courtroom, the sting's manic clarity finally starting to wane, leaving behind an aching exhaustion. He had won and lost everything simultaneously. He glanced down at his ankle, then across the street to a news vendor displaying a newspaper headline that already read, "Honeywater hive migrates, neighbor's property next." The karmic shock was complete. His house was saved, but the war had become eternal. As he watched the chaos erupt around him, a single, tiny yellow jacket landed on his shoulder, tasted the air, and flew back in the direction of Carol's newly claimed buzzing property.